Hello everyone, I think Katie and I are going to try and breeze through our presentations as quickly as possible. I'm a big believer in questions. I'll get there.
Okay.
So I'm gonna try and go quickly. My name is Jason Vogel. I work with App Associates. I'm sort of the odd duck maybe in the room. I've been working at Stratus Consulting, now App Associates, for 8 years, doing almost exclusively work on climate change adaptation, and that means doing the science of climate change, actually educating people on what the future might look like, to conducting vulnerability assessments, risk assessments, up through sort of the really cool stuff that I like the most, which is what do you do about it? What are our adaptation options? What kind of policies should we implement? So it's a little bit of a different world, but I see how much they overlap. So I wanted to come here and have an opportunity to speak with you all. Today I'm going to focus on one project I'm working on, which is for the Kresge Foundation. This is our title, I guess, for now, Community-Based Adaptation in the United States, a Critical Evaluation. It was funded by the Kresge Foundation, which is an organization that's put a tremendous amount of money into local communities to try and really help facilitate community-level action on the issue of climate change, and predominantly adaptation and resilience, depending on the word you want to use. But when they put this project together with us, they really didn't want to just have a review of the work that they have funded. They wanted to look across the board. What are communities doing in the United States? What does the state of the field look like? What does it mean to do adaptation? What is success? So a couple of key points, though, is that we are focused on action. If you haven't actually done something, if you've just written a plan, we weren't going to really look deeply into what you were doing. We wanted to see concrete vulnerability reductions on the ground. So that's what we were looking for. And it was definitely at the community level. So there's plenty of stuff going on at the state level. The feds are doing things. We weren't really focused on that either. And final point, the project as a whole, we tried to keep it as empirically grounded as possible. So I'm going to stick to the facts, man. And I'll get a little bit into conclusions at the end, but happy to talk to any of you later about some of the cooler, more intellectual stuff that's coming out of this. The purpose of the project here was really, it has sort of a normative point, right? We're trying to catalyze action on community-based adaptation in the United States. We're not just here to study it. We really want to empower people and communities to make a difference in their own community. But then we want to ask these big picture questions as well. And this is not a comprehensive list of the kinds of questions we're asking, but what motivates communities to take these different kinds of actions? How do they get funding? It's a question everyone seems to ask, but let's see if we can find out answers from the different communities we're going to look at here. What role does leadership play? We just heard a whole talk on that, and we have examples of 17 different communities that have different types of leadership, different people providing leadership in different ways to realize the action and the success that they've actually had. What kind of strategies are they using? So those are some of the questions we'll be able to touch on. But the point I wanted to make here is basically, while I might self-identify as a climate change adaptation practitioner, and I'm not sure what you all would self-identify as, but I will generalize into some sort of natural hazards practitioner of some sort. I really think that there's a common denominator of trying to get action done on the ground. And if we can look at that and be problem-oriented, how do we make progress? There's an awful lot we can learn from one another in the work that we've done. So as I said, in addition to, without going through everything that this project has done, we've done 17 case studies of these 17 communities, and if you put on your reading glasses, you probably still can't read it. But we've tried to get a diversity of communities, and to that point, we've got Seattle, one of the bluest of blue cities in the country. We've got Tulsa, one of the reddest of red. We really want to make sure we're not just talking to liberal college towns and what they're able to accomplish. So we're trying to find that diversity. Avalon, New Jersey, Norfolk, Virginia, both dealing with storm surge and sea level rise, but very different sizes of communities with a very different economic base. So we're trying to get, again, that kind of diversity even when you're facing a similar type of hazard. Comparing Cleveland and Miami-Dade, and these are random, like we could probably pick any two, but here in Cleveland, Miami-Dade County, the socioeconomic conditions are dramatically different. Cleveland has been in a slump since maybe 1982 or something. Miami-Dade, while county-wide, has a little more variety, also has really nice property that would be nice to go for a vacation on. Flagstaff and Mobile, in some cases we're looking at sort of natural systems and what you can account for there. Mobile County is about building up oyster reefs to reduce storm surge, and Flagstaff is all about how do we deal with forests to minimize the hazard of forest fire. So this is a quick and dirty sense of the types of actions we're profiling in these communities, because in addition to the diversity of the communities themselves, there's actually quite a diversity in the types of actions that they've taken. So Avalon, New Jersey has been on a multi-decade process of both acquiring property along the coast and then building dunes and nourishing beaches to prevent storm surge related damages, and it was pretty effective during Sandy. El Paso, Texas developed a desalination plant as a way to mitigate against the risk of drought. Lots more could be said about that for anybody who's anti-massive energy consumption, but I'll save that for your questions. Tulsa, Oklahoma has been mentioned enough times, I don't think I need to go into it too much, but an incredible example of what in the climate change adaptation field we call transformative adaptation. They retreated and relocated over 1,000 different properties on a voluntary program. It's a pretty amazing story. It's something that most climate change adaptation professionals think is impossible. Here's an example of where it's been done. They didn't do it for climate change. Lots to learn from one another. Miami-Dade, here we start getting into some of the more policy, relevant stuff you can do. They've integrated climate change into each element of their countywide comprehensive plan. So instead of having this separate climate change element that sits there and doesn't accomplish anything, they've tried to incorporate climate change in all of the other elements to make it part of the decision-making process on every decision that's made. Chula Vista is probably our coolest sort of comprehensive example in our communities that we've selected, where they've gone through a very methodical process to get to look at a variety of potential actions to reduce climate risks, and have actually started implementing some. So they've gone through a planning process and the plan isn't just gathering dust. It's not weighing down a bookshelf. It's actually being opened, and they're implementing some stuff. In this case, we profiled their cool roofs and shade trees programs to counteract the urban heat island effect. And then finally, example here for Boston, Massachusetts, where they started integrating climate change into their building code to require, it's not quite a requirement yet, but it's very difficult to get through the planning process without a serious consideration of climate change if you're going to build any structure over, I think, 50,000 square feet. I won't have time to go into individual examples, but I've got a few here. At least there's pictures of beer that should cheer you up. Think about happy hour a little later down the road here. Just to kind of give you a sense, right? We're looking at the different impacts, drought, storm surge, wildfire, but also this diversity of actions. In this case, it's a water supply shortage response plan. And then what we did in each case was we went through and we tried to extract what were the real essential elements, what got them to success. And it's different, as you would expect, across all communities, but there are some themes that cut across, and I'll kind of jump past most of these to try and get to some of those cross-cutting themes. So just as an example of the kind of question you might ask, or I might ask anyway, what empowers communities to take action despite the uncertainty, particularly the uncertainty around climate change and thinking about the future? And the beauty of, I think, the work we've done is that we can find a lot of answers to that question in these different communities. In Tulsa, to speak to the question, the little back and forth we had here, there was really leadership that emerged of sort of grassroots action by citizens who decided that they'd had enough of being flooded. They didn't like watching their community slowly economically decline, and really started lobbying to make things different. Some of them got hired on as city staff, but there were also political winds that shifted. Now, Senator James Inhofe was not very friendly to the things Tulsa was trying to do for his 8 years, I believe, as mayor. So there's a lot of different kind of stories of what's empowering the community there. Grand Rapids and Flagstaff, two of the communities we looked at, actually had a vote of the citizens to pass either a bond initiative or funding a tax for Grand Rapids to deal with it's complete green streets, both transportation and stormwater mitigation issues. But there's something beautiful about having a vote of the citizens where 60 to 70% of the populace says, yes, that's a great idea. It really empowers staff to then go off and get things done in a way that sometimes isn't easily accomplished otherwise. Boston, Miami-Dade had really thought-provoking leaders, mayors that went out and took some risks and tried to put their stamp on their community and empowered their own staff to take some risks, to do some things differently that might not otherwise happen. Avalon and Boston got smacked pretty hard by some extreme events, and that really motivated them to start taking action. But that's actually the story of a lot of these communities. At some point in their past, there was an extreme event that was significant enough and impacted their quality of life, the economics enough that it led to action. Norfolk is an interesting example. It's the only example in our 17 communities where an action was actually changed due to climate change information. And what they did was, the action that we profiled was a requirement to increase the freeboard for all new construction in a particular neighborhood to 3 feet above the 100-year floodplain. And the proposal from city staff was 2 feet. The planning board, the appointed planning board, looked at climate change information about sea level rise, realized that 2 feet would buy them maybe 20 years of safety. They decided that they wanted to add that extra foot to just hedge their bets. They were a little more risk averse than staff. Interesting case, kind of unique, kind of sad, I guess that it's unique in that sense. Grand Rapids and Mobile County, they were really hitching the wagon of reducing vulnerability to other issues. Grand Rapids was trying to rebuild their street infrastructure, and were able to bring stormwater mitigation issues into that. Mobile County really had economic development, but also the oysters themselves are a valuable economic sector, so there were multiple reasons for them to do those things. Another question I put up here, these are random questions, I have a lot more that are in my head. What kind of engagement, community engagement, stakeholder engagement really can help further climate change adaptation? You can change those words, to what's going to inspire people to mitigate hazards in their own communities. And again, we see an incredible diversity of things, types of engagement that were dealt with in these communities. In some cases, like Boston and Seattle, it was a lot of internal staff capacity building. Right, the people. There were a few leaders within staff, but they needed to educate their own people before they sort of went out to the community, so they had a solid background where they were all in agreement. I mentioned the vote of the citizens with Grand Rapids and Flagstaff. There was a major educational component to that. They went out and they were convincing people in the community, everyday citizens, to vote for these things for a variety of reasons. Tulsa and the Southwest Ground Collaborative up in Montana were these real citizens grassroots efforts. Again, a lot of knocking door to door, getting people engaged to really make a difference. El Paso did a very different type of engagement. Didn't require much at the level of the community. Kay Bailey Hutchinson was the chairman of the Armed Services Committee, I think at the time, in the Senate. And so it's the Kay Bailey Hutchinson Desalination Facility. She basically single-handedly managed to get the resources they needed to build the only inland desalination plant in the country right now. But it took a lot of community leaders lobbying elected officials to make that happen. So a different type of engagement. Chula Vista, again, different, more holistic. They actually used citizen engagement very strategically. Staff knew that their city council would be far more supportive of things that came from the citizens than things that came from staff. So they very consciously created committees, work groups of citizens to come up with the ideas that staff then took forward to council. And it's been very successful. Mobile County, a more conservative sort of area, they provided a lot of local jobs, and they did a lot of volunteerism outreach to bring people to the project site to see what was actually going on. There's just a few other things in the vein of cross-case findings. I just slapped this together last night, so this is a brief, tentative sense of some of the things that we're looking at in all the evidence we've generated here. One is the multitude of pathways that are taken to achieve concrete reductions in vulnerability. In some cases, like I mentioned, Norfolk, it's this incremental change. It's change a little piece of the policy, increase the freeboard. But that doesn't really address the entire community's vulnerability. You're taking one sector at a time, in this case, residential buildings. In some cases, as I mentioned, transformational change, Tulsa completely buying out properties, moving the downtown area. Capacity building is another one that comes up a lot, and it speaks a bit to what you're talking about. In many of these communities, there's a big process of just educating themselves. What does climate change mean for us? What are the kinds of actions we can take about it? How do we educate our own people so they ask the right questions at the right time? And since I've self-limited myself to 15 minutes, I think I'll go to the question slide that you can't actually ask any questions until the end.
Okay, let's switch the slides. Any quick question, a real quick question for Jason to clarify while we're switching the slides?